Alrighty, today I'm going to be doing a review of Valkyrie Elysium. So, as kind of like an introduction, Valkyrie Elysium is an action RPG with fast-paced combat, mostly instant charging spells of 8 various elements, and the ability to summon souls of powerful, purified dead spirits, which are former warriors, across different time spans as what they call in the game Einherjar. I platinumed the game in about 60 hours of gameplay. I received all 4 of the endings, and generally I had a pretty great time with the title. It definitely has a few flaws, but for any fan of a solid action RPG game, I would say definitely give it a try. The Valkyrie series was incepted by a studio called Tri-Ace. However, they're not anywhere to be found here. The series terminology is based on the original game, which is called Valkyrie Profile, which was a turn-based RPG with a twist on its kind of combat mechanics. It kind of very similar to Indivisible if you've played that game, but I think Valkyrie Profile was kind of the inspiration for that game. Anyhow, the updated version of that game is available to the digital deluxe purchasers of Valkyrie Elysium for free, but it did get delayed until a little bit before Christmas. So, going over the story, this might be kind of spoiler territory, so if this isn't something you want to hear, I'm gonna section this video off so that you can just skip the entire story section, because I will be talking a little bit about the endings as well. Anyhow, for me, the story is kind of presented like a Souls-like game. It's there if you dig deep enough, but if you fail to do that, you're gonna kind of miss most of the point of the game, I think. Essentially, you are a soul plucked by Odin out of a living existence, and you've lost your memories, and you've been turned into kind of like this demigod known as a Valkyrie. And at first, you're kind of like a blind follower to this god Odin of a what appears to me to be a dying world. The people in the game are mostly absent due to have becoming enemies, and they're kind of classified in this game as the undead. So essentially, the way the plot kind of unfolds is Odin has you go find mystical artifacts known as the Four Gifts. And at the same time that you're doing that, he's having you purify the undead, and he kind of is vague. He just kind of tells you that this is supposedly these actions are going to help save the world, and the reason this lazy bitch can't do it himself is because all his power is waned for some reason. He doesn't really explain why that's happened very well either. So, about the midpoint of the game, you start to fail a few of Odin's quests to retrieve these gifts, and he becomes increasingly more irate and cruel to the protagonist, the Valkyrie, and the Einherjar kind of start to question the Valkyrie's orders. They kind of, in the beginning, are like, wow, she seems a little naive, she's just following all these orders, kind of like, without considering them, sort of a situation. Not only that, but you run into a dark Valkyrie named Hildy multiple times, and she's saying, like, you're doing all this without knowing what you're doing, and it's not very smart, sort of a thing. So, from there, I feel like the meat and potatoes of the story is kind of placed in 2 different areas. The ending that you want to receive, and not only that, but also the Einherjar stories, which are mostly locked in your menu and behind some side stories. So, first we're going to kind of discuss the endings, and they're based off of basically 2 things. One is whether or not you found all of the 8 verdant blossoms, and the other contingency is whether or not you speak to an NPC called Armand in the final area. So, again, I'm going to kind of be spoilery territory with the endings, because I feel like I said before, most of the story is locked behind these endings. So, take this as another warning if you want to skip past this. Like I said, I'm going to put it in the video. Anyhow, the first ending abruptly ends the game with no end bosses, and essentially has the Valkyrie decide to live as a human instead of a god and go to be with Armand. you find out essentially that Armand was your lover on Earth prior to you being turned into a god by Odin, and you regain your human memories. And it's a very short ending. There's kind of an ominous crow with a red eye, very much like Odin's, which appears to kind of be watching your actions. And essentially, since you failed to decode the verdant blossoms, it looks nice on paper that you've run away to go be with your lover, but at the same time, you don't really know. You failed to like find out what's happening with the world. So that's kind of why I want to start with that ending. The second ending has you agreeing with Odin despite the many warnings that have been, offered to you by various parties. And Odin lets you know that the world has to be reborn in order to prevent it from being destroyed. And essentially in this ending, you stay at his side and you ascend to the newly made world, but it's just you and Odin entering this new world. Everything else is essentially remade. So the third ending has you kind of siding more with Fenrir, which is a different god in this kind of world. So essentially, you prevent what's known as the Ragnarok cycle from being able to continue. That's kind of like this endless cycle of birth and rebirth of the planet. So this is going to have some dire effects for the world, as it essentially dooms it by destroying the only means to make the world new. You're destroying kind of that Ragnarok process. So essentially the way that this ending ends is there's an unknowable threat of your actions looming over the world's destruction, and you kind of just decide to make your life the most of it. Fenrir's alive. They don't really get into what Fenrir does, but essentially you make a life for yourself with Armand and the Einherjar, which I honestly liked this ending probably the most. Because, who, like, in reality, like, let's say you're just me on planet Earth, like, how is one to know when the world's gonna end or if it's gonna end? And like, the thing that I liked about this is the Einherjar are, sticking around and Armand is sticking around. But, the world could end because essentially we've starved it of this Ragnarok process. Anyhow, the fourth ending has you finding out that Ragnarok is essentially a process by which Odin, who is extremely selfish and only cares about retaining his power, this is him constantly destroying and recreating the world so that he's just the ultimate god of this particular reality, essentially. So, once you read the Verdant Blossoms, kind of summarizing it, the gods were originally intended to return the souls to the Great World Tree Yggdrasil in order to prevent the undead from appearing, and that makes Ragnarok not need to occur. However, much power can be gained by the gods in the form of these souls, which is why he has you purifying them, and Odin intends to do just that to maintain his grasp of power for all time, instead of following kind of the natural order of things, which is to, put the souls in Yggdrasil. So, this is the only ending in which Hildi survives, and the resulting world is ruled over by the two Valkyries. It is a bit bittersweet for me, as the Einherjar, being souls themselves, are returned to Yggdrasil, but I think, while it being bittersweet, nobody kind of lives forever, so it's kind of necessary, I think, the way that the story has been set up, but this is the only true way that the world can be preserved without being reborn, and the only true way that Valkyrie could be with Armand, because in the preceding other three endings, you don't have enough information when you create whatever that particular ending is, so regardless of what you do outside of the true ending, it's creating a finite time structure of happiness, which will inevitably be interrupted by either Ragnarok or the death of the planet, is how I feel like they imply it. So one thing that I really love about the endings in this is that if you get one of them and you save a clear file, the clear file is prior to you finishing the final chapter. So if you missed some of the blossoms, or didn't run into Armand, you can go straight back in there, fight like 5 or 6, overworld enemy fights, and then you can go and get those subsequent endings without having to replay the entire game, which is really nice, in my opinion. I've always hated it when I play an RPG and it's like there's all these 500 different endings, but you have to replay the whole game. It gets a little old. But I think they kind of structured that this way because this game does not have a new game plus sort of a situation. So it's kind of a way to prevent you from having to replay it multiple times, which, again, like I said, is really, really nice. Anyhow, some of the tidbits of the 4 Einherjar stories bleed into the game when you get to their respective chapter. So as like an example, in Chapter 2 you get your first Einherjar, and as you're running around the overworld of the map, you kind of hear a little bit of backstory about him, but you don't get the full context of the story arcs that are in the menu. And what I thought was kind of a strange decision is I didn't really know that there was more to the story for this game the first time around if I went in the menu and replayed those conversations. So it was just something that I think luckily happened upon. And I thought it was kind of an odd decision to hide like most of the story for your 4 companions in the menu. But that being said, I do think that they were very well voice acted. They have some sound effects, but it's mostly like a text novel sort of thing with sound effects and speech, if that makes sense. Anyhow, another thing that I thought was kind of weird is like randomly I would like get up, take a break, grab some water, and then I'd like come back, and some of the Einherjar are chatting about the Valkyrie or to the Valkyrie. So it might kind of help you get more out of the story if you just stand there doing nothing for a couple moments until they start talking. Kind of another odd decision choice on how to structure the story, but it's definitely something that's there. So, graphically, I think this game doesn't look much better than a PS3 or a PS4 game. One thing that I did like is that despite some of the muddy textures, that most of the enemies and NPCs and things are kind of like cell shaded. They have like this black outline around everything. I've heard some people complain that they don't like the style of the game in that regard, but I thought it was a clever way to make the graphics pop while staying on what appeared to me to be kind of a shoestring budget. Without it, I think the game would look more muddy in kind of like Babylon's Fall in a way, if you've ever seen any gameplay for that. The music feels appropriate for the game, but it's also kind of basic. There really isn't a ton of variety. Like, most of the 9 chapters have the same boss music, the same overworld music. So I felt like that was a little weak, honestly. There wasn't any, like, with a lot of games that I play, like, I'll go and download the soundtrack and listen to it in my car when I'm on road trips and various other things. But with this game, I didn't really feel any track pop out at me that made me want to, listen to those outside of the game. So that was kind of a weak point for me. Now, the gameplay, I feel like this is the point where the game absolutely shines. It's definitely my favorite part of the game personally. I have some of the gameplay playing in the upper right hand corner, but my favorite thing is that you can use this skill called the soul tether, where you attach onto an enemy and zip across the room to attack them to prevent your combo from going down to 0, which is super nice. It keeps the action rapid and it prevents you from having to slowly walk around the place, which is something that I really find distasteful in a lot of games. Most recently with Soul Hackers 2, but honestly, the nice thing is Atlas is putting a patch out to fix that, so, maybe this game will get something akin to that. Because I do know that in November, they are releasing a new mode, like a battle kind of royale mode, and also you get to play as Hildy and see a little bit more her side of the story, which is nice. Anyhow, the battle can be aerial, it can be on the ground. There's 6 unique weapon move sets. There's perfect evades and blocks. There's auto summoning features for your warriors, which only last on the battlefield for up to 30 seconds before having to be resummoned. And if you look at the gameplay, you'll see that there's an empty gauge underneath the green life bar. That's your soul gauge. That essentially shows how often you can summon those Einherjar. When it's depleted, you can no longer summon them, but it repletes every time you touch a save point, along with your health and your magic points. I think my favorite throwback to the original series too is that they have the Nibelung Valesti skill. And I have a video of that on my YouTube if anyone wants to take a peek. It's just a really cool skill. Anyhow, enemies can grab you and disrupt the action. They can knock you to the ground. But those are the only parts, I think, really, where the combat doesn't shine, because you're interrupted for a brief period of time while you're waiting to get back up and fight, essentially. The closest game I would compare this to is Drakengard 3. But with less weapons. You get 6 weapon types, but only one iteration of each of those types. Whereas in Drakengard 3, you got 4 weapon types, but multiple iterations of those weapons. And each of the Einherjars has an element that they're associated with, which infuses into your weapon. And each of the enemies have an elemental weakness over their head with their life bar. And I guess that's just the perk of being a god, because you just automatically know the weaknesses of all your enemies right off the bat, and all the bosses have those as well. I found it to be reasonably challenging, but there was no point where it was frustratingly difficult, and I did beat the game on easy, normal, and hard. So, if you want a little bit more of a challenge, I'd say start on hard. Anyhow, there's a bar to the left of the enemy which shows how soon you are to breaking the resistance, which knocks them over for a brief period of time. And that lets you get in some cheap hits before they kind of get back up to wreak more havoc. Like with the normal enemies, you're usually going to kill them before they get out of that crushed state. But the bosses, there were some bosses that I had to crush up to 3 times in order to defeat them. Afterwards, there's a brief period where you're unable to fill up that bar again, too. So once you crush them, you can't just immediately crush them again. If they survive the initial crush, the game makes you wait a little bit before that gauge comes back, essentially. And you can tell that that's the case because the element on the enemy life bar will gray out instead of having a color. Like right now, you can see those purple lightning bolts above them. If you crushed them and then let them survive long enough, then it turns like a gray color. So that's showing you that you can't crush them again for a period of time. Anyhow, the only real gripes I have with the combat would be that the Valkyrie skill tree doesn't have a lot of customization, and that the 6 weapons, while having different move sets, don't have different stats when fully upgraded. So there's not like a particular weapon that's going to have better magic damage or a particular weapon that's better for physical. I felt like that was an odd decision to just keep, the stats the same across all the 6 weapons. And it just would have felt nice to see a little bit more variety there. It also appeared to me that the proficiency system of the weapons doesn't have any point. Like, they start at G proficiency and work their way up to triple S, but to me, the weapons didn't get any stronger. You don't learn any different move sets. You learn your move sets, expand them rather, when you upgrade the weapon itself, not by using the weapon over and over again, which is what's tied to the proficiency system. So I really don't understand the point of that, or the trophy that's associated with it either, but we'll get into that. So all in all, I'd give the game Valkyrie Elysium a 7 out of 10. It's a very solid effort. It's a very much wanted revival of the series, and it's the most fun action RPG I've played since Kingdom Hearts 3. However, that being said, I really didn't think the game was worth the full price tag of $70. If you want to play the game and you're feeling the pinch from inflation in this economy, I recommend waiting for a sale. I think this game is gonna, over the test of time, be viewed more as like a hidden gem, so I don't see it staying in that $70 for long. Like, wait till January, and I would be willing to bet it'll be going for 20 to $40, honestly. But, if you have the means and you're bored and there's no other games that you're wanting to play action RPG wise that are coming out on the horizon, then I would say give it a spin. I really doubt you'll be disappointed from the combat aspect. And now that you know a little bit about how the stories are locked behind like idling, a little bit locked behind the endings, and a little bit locked in the menus for the Einherjar stories, which I also have all those videos up on my YouTube as well. It'll help you kind of approach the game in such a way that you'll get more out of the story than I think I did on my first try. As for platinuming the game, you need 2 full playthroughs, one on normal and one on hard. The most annoying trophy is going to be upgrading your proficiency with all 6 weapons to that SSS proficiency. So for reference, I beat the game on normal as my first run, and that took me 22 hours, and that was doing everything other than maxing out the proficiency trophy. My second run through the game was I played it on hard, and I skipped all the cutscenes, and I beat it as quick as possible. That took me about 12 hours because I did grind to make sure I had at least one maxed out weapon and a couple of skills that I found useful on normal, so I had to do a little bit more backtracking. Because, on hard, it's harder, and I wanted to have the good skills, so I took the extra time to redo some of the side quests. That being said, too, the side quests were also lacking in variety, in my opinion. It's just go here and grab this, or go here and kill that. There's really no variety. One thing I did like, though, is I feel like the side quests respect your time. There's only 30 of them. Most of them can be beaten in 5 to 10 minutes, and they black out, rather they make inaccessible the portions of the map that you do not need to explore. So they did a really good job in making it so that you're not wasting your time running around the whole level again, just looking for one thing. Like, everything is pretty much limited to a very specific part of the map, and it makes everything else inaccessible, so that's nice. And for reference too, I was able to platinum the game in about 60 hours. I had that 22 hours for my normal run, 12 hours for my hard run, and the rest of it was probably 2.5 hours per weapon grinding to get SSS ranks on all the other 5 weapons. But one playthrough through the game did have me get one triple S weapon. The only problem with that is that when you beat the game, there's no new game plus, so you can't, cycle over that proficiency into a new run, which for me was kind of like, why did we make this decision when this takes such a huge amount of time to do, and the replay value is kind of built in with those 4 endings. So while the game respects your time in some degrees, it certainly doesn't respect your time with regard to that particular trophy. But, obviously, trophies are optional. Anyhow, I hope you found this review informative. And, if you want to chat, definitely leave me some comments. I answer all of them. I'm a really small one-person channel, so I don't really get a lot of hits or comments, but I'd love to engage with people when they find the content interesting. So I hope to hear from you guys, and we will see you next time.